A warm welcome to all my dear students. In today's session, we are going to understand three major concepts: types of respiration, mechanism of breathing, and human respiratory system. Okay, so let's get started. Remember in our previous session, I told you about the end products of digestion. It's super duper important for all of us to keep in mind that end products of carbohydrates is gonna be glucose. The digestion of proteins gives us amino acids, and fat digestion will give you fatty acids and glycerol. These are the end products of digestion, and among all these end products, glucose is the quickest and best source of energy, and hence it forms the base of respiration. What do I mean by that? Stay with me for a few minutes and you will understand how this even happens. So, I think I told you in the last session that all these life processes are interlinked. They are not standalone systems in our body. I told you already how the digestive and circulatory system are interlinked to each other. Where do you think the link comes? Yes, it comes in the small intestine where the villi are richly supplied with blood capillaries, which absorb the nutrients in our small intestine and transport that to all parts of our body. Talking about that, now comes into picture the respiratory system. So let's go ahead and understand the respiratory system also. Alright, now what is the respiration process at the first place? Take in air for me once. Take in air. Good. Oxygen is in your system. Breathe out. Congratulations. Carbon dioxide just left the building. What you just did was breathing, which is something you do not usually think twice about. Breathing is just so very prevalent and essential that every organism does it, and we all have basically flipped the switch of this particular life process to autopilot. So let's take a journey and try to understand and try to get the nuances of this process. Well, I was talking about breathing, and there is also respiration. Is there a difference? Yes, there is. Breathing is just the first step of respiration, and respiration is a process by which we pull in air into our lungs and then we push that out. Air that we pull in will oxygenate our blood, and air that we push out will carry the waste carbon dioxide produced by our body. Whereas respiration is not merely taking in oxygen, but it is also the utilization of this oxygen that has been taken in to get energy. It is the chemical reaction where the mitochondria of each and every cell of our body burns the glucose. Where does that glucose comes from? From our food. So the mitochondria burns the glucose using oxygen to produce energy that our body runs on. This happens in each and every cell of the body, and the cellular part of respiration is called, well, cellular respiration. Respiration is a process of breakdown of glucose to release energy in a living organism, which is needed for their survival. In the process of using this energy, we also liberate heat as a byproduct. Just because you eat food, it's never gonna give you the energy. It's not because you are activating that you get energy. Of course, eating may be the first step, but it has to be followed by a lot many complex processes. We eat, food gets digested, it gets absorbed in our small intestine. Our blood take it to multiple cells in our body, and then what happens? That is what we are going to be understanding in this session. In addition to this, as we said breathing, we just inhale. Oxygen enters into our body, fills up the lungs, and in our lungs, there is a lot more that happens than just exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. How exactly does this happen? Let's try to understand. Broadly, respiration can be classified into two types. It's aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration, as the word indicates, being aerated. Aerobic exercises, aerobic dance, you must have heard of all them. That is because it involves oxygen as the major component. So basically aerobic respiration is the type of respiration that makes use of oxygen as its major component. Whereas anaerobic respiration, as we can see, is just the opposite of aerobic respiration, which simply means it occurs in the absence of oxygen. So, where does this happen? Why are we talking about it? Because human beings, we use oxygen. So, why are we bothered about this anaerobic respiration? Well, the truth is that anaerobic respiration acts as a major type of respiration in many tiny organisms like bacteria. But even in our body, there are certain situations when it carry out anaerobic respiration, and we certainly must be aware of that. Let's have a look at the steps of the respiration next. See, as we know that glucose is a 6-carbon molecule, and glucose is absorbed in our villi by blood capillaries, and bloodstream carries it to all parts of the body, to all the cells of the body. We have billions and trillions of cells in our body. Let's imagine one single cell out of all. All cells contain cytoplasm. We all know that. So what happens in that? Once it is raised in the cell, it enters the cytoplasm, where it is undergone through a major pathway and gets converted into pyruvate. Pyruvate is a 3-carbon molecule. So glucose, being a 6-carbon molecule, gets broken down into 2 molecules of pyruvate, because 2 into 3 has to be 6. Correct? So, let me repeat. 1 glucose gets converted into 2 molecules of pyruvate, and this process releases some energy, and this happens in every cell. After that, pyruvate can either taken up one of these 3 pathways depending upon which organism it is present in, or depending upon what kind of situation is it in, and so on. Okay? For instance, if we can see at the top, if it's present in yeast or any other anaerobic organism or something like that, where there is an absence of oxygen, pyruvate gets converted into ethanol, which is a 2-carbon molecule with carbon dioxide along with the release of some energy. Okay, so we call this process, what we call this process? We call it fermentation. You must be aware of fermented food and stuff like idli, dosa, chole bhature. Coming to the second fate of pyruvate, or second option that pyruvate has, is when you carries out heavy exercise or fast jogging or fast running, eventually you may reach a point where you feel like breathless. You start panting for breath. Why does this happen? Because the oxygen that is already there in our blood cells has pretty much used up by our body to release the energy. So, when there is a lack of oxygen, or we can say insufficient oxygen present in muscle cells, what happens? Pyruvate gets converted into lactic acid. It does release some energy. Like pyruvate, lactic acid is also a 3-carbon molecule. So, this all happens in the lack of oxygen. Whereas, in any living organism, in case of aerobic organisms, what happens? Pyruvate, which was formed in the cytoplasm of the cell, enters into mitochondria of the cell. And inside that mitochondria, it undergoes another pathway where it gets basically converted into carbon dioxide, water, and a lot of energy is released as well. The amount of energy released in all these processes varies to a great extent. It is the maximum in case of aerobic respiration. Alright. Now, plants, as we all know, that respiration occurs all the time, whereas photosynthesis occurs only during the day. So, let's study this is important to understand by all of us, because there is a myth, there is a misconception that plants breathe in carbon dioxide and breathe out oxygen. No, in plants, photosynthesis and respiration are two major independently occurring processes. In photosynthesis, carbon dioxide is utilized and oxygen is released as a byproduct. Okay, and that is the oxygen that acts as a life-sustaining gas for all of us. including the plants, including the aquatic animals, including the aerial animals, including everybody. Whereas plants are also living organisms, they also need to take in oxygen for their survival, because even in their body, a lot of respiratory pathways do happen. So respiration is a continuous process that occurs all the time, whereas photosynthesis occurs only during the day. Why is it so? Because as we can see, sunlight is essential for photosynthesis, whereas respiration just can happen all the time. What about aquatic organisms? Aquatic organisms use the oxygen dissolved in water so that they can breathe, and the amount of dissolved oxygen is fairly low as compared to the amount of oxygen present in the air, which is why the rate of breathing in aquatic organisms is higher as compared to the terrestrial organisms. Now coming to the mechanism of breathing in humans. So what do we see? We see that inhalation and exhalation concept, and that is super duper important even if we are not doing it consciously. It keeps happening all the time. While we eat, while we work, or even when we are sleeping. See, when we inhale deeply, we might have seen that our tummy bulges out. This is because of the diaphragm, the dome-shaped muscle located below the thoracic cavity, which is meant to separate the thoracic cavity from our abdominal cavity. So, the diaphragm basically contracts or basically goes down when we inhale the air, because the oxygen that is filling up the lungs is pushing the lungs out so much. Hence, the diaphragm understands that there has to be enough space inside the thoracic cavity for our lungs to expand. So, during active inhalation process, the diaphragm contracts so that there is more room in the thoracic cavity. Hence, diaphragm contracts, chest expands, and the air flows in. Whereas, during exhalation, the opposite happens. The diaphragm relaxes to normal position. Please remember, this is a source of many confusion in students, that when we inhale, does the diaphragm relax or contract? Just keep in mind, it contracts during inhalation and vice versa. So, this is good enough to understand how inhalation and exhalation process takes place inside our body. Let's understand this concept with the help of an activity. See, this is a model of lungs and the diaphragm. These two balloons act as lungs and this balloon acts as diaphragm. When the diaphragm moves down, the lungs expand, and when the diaphragm moves up, the lungs contract. Let me show it again to you. Diaphragm moves down, lungs expand, and diaphragm moves up, lungs contract. Just keep in mind, it contracts during inhalation and vice versa. So, this is good enough that we have understood how inhalation and exhalation process takes place inside our body. Now, coming to the structure of human respiratory system. As we all know, it starts with an external nasal cavity, which we externally call the nose, and inside the nasal cavity or the nasal passage and the two holes that we can see at the opening are called the nostrils. Human beings typically have a pair of nostrils, right? We inhale the air through the nose, where it is filtered with the help of nasal hairs and mucus that is already present inside the nasal cavity. The air that enters the pharynx, which in fact a common passage for all the food materials and for the air that we breathe in. But in that, there is a portion where the pharynx gets divided as one part of it opens into esophagus, the other part of it opens into larynx, which is our voice box. It is inside the voice box that we have a pair of vocal cords. Because of the vibration of the vocal cords, we are able to produce sound. Okay, so we have spoken about the nose, the nostrils, the nasal passage, which opens into the pharynx, followed by the larynx, or the voice box, and then what happens? The larynx opens into the windpipe or the trachea. The trachea is lined by cartilaginous rings from the inside, which ensures that the trachea do not collapse. While we are doing active breathing, the trachea do not collapse. Okay? Then, what happens? The trachea divides into two bronchi. Singular is bronchus, and we have a pair so that they are bronchi. What do they do? The right and left bronchi enters into right and left lungs, and the inside of lungs, it further branches into bronchioles. Primary is bronchioles, secondary bronchioles, and tertiary bronchioles, which further ends up into very tiny balloon-like air packets, which are called alveoli, which are technically called alveoli. Alveolar wall is one-celled wall, and it is richly supplied with blood capillaries just like the villi do in the small intestine. Here again, we can see how respiratory and circulatory system are linked to each other. The respiratory pigment hemoglobin that is present in red blood cells brings the carbon dioxide from rest of the body for the release into the alveolar cavity, and the oxygen in the alveolar air is taken up by the blood in the alveolar vessels that needs to be transported to the or to all the cells of the body. In higher organisms, diffusion pressure alone cannot carry out this process, and the respiratory pigment hemoglobin, which is present in red blood cells, carries the oxygen and transports it to various cells of the body. And this is how respiration process is carried out in human beings. I hope that much is clear. Okay, students. So, just do remember that this concept is very important to understand the second life process, that is respiration. So, let's have a very quick quiz time. Students, you just have 5 seconds to answer these questions. So, the first question is, glucose to pyruvate conversion occurs in the first option is cytoplasm, mitochondria, nucleus, ribosomes. And your time is up. The answer to this question is, it occurs in cytoplasm. So, the next question is, the muscles that separate the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity is, first option is cardiac muscles, second is rib cage, third is diaphragm, and fourth is lungs. So, the answer is diaphragm, and I am sure you all must have got the answer to this. Next question, question number 3. During inhalation, the diaphragm moves downwards, moves inward, stays as such, or is not at all involved? Yes, so the answer is the diaphragm moves downward. Let's proceed to next question. Gases exchange occurs in, gaseous exchange basically occurs where? First option is bronchi, second is alveoli, third is bronchioles, and next is trachea. Time up. So, the answer is alveoli. Great job, students. You have done a wonderful job of having understood these concepts. So, from today's session, we all have understood the types of respiration, the mechanism of respiration, and human respiratory system. But don't leave yet. I have a homework question for you. Why do we feel breathless as we go higher up a mountain? Think about it. Do a bit of research. Till then, keep learning. Thank you.